Uh, Thanks, Steve, and if we could kick it off, Ed. So, good evening. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight to talk to you all about a subject that's very dear to my heart, or more accurately, my brain. If I wasn't enough of a geek already with a love of all things Trek, Margaret Atwood, cupcakes, my other love in life is seizures. And not because I have them, but because I see people with them every day. And it provides a bit of a window into their brain. So by using a window into their soul, I'm a bit like a neurological peeping Tom. Now, the thing about seizures is they're pretty common. In a group of 400 here tonight, I would expect that at least 40 of you at some stage in your life will have experienced a seizure or are going to experience a seizure. And about a third of that 40 will go on to develop epilepsy. And the reason it's pretty common is we all have a threshold below which we can have a seizure. For instance, if you had a bit of back pain and you were taking some tramadol and perhaps had a couple of red wines before you went to bed, didn't sleep very well because of the pain, had a couple of joints in the morning before you got up, chances are the combination of these events would cause you to have a seizure. And the reason for this is each of these conditions lowers that threshold ever so slightly until the line is crossed and you seize. Now, it doesn't mean that you have epilepsy, it just means that all of these conditions conspired at a single point in time. Provided you see a physio for your back pain next time, you should be fine. Now, you might be wondering what a seizure is exactly, and the easiest way to think about it is an electrical discharge within the brain, a short circuit of sorts. Now, when neurons communicate in the brain, they do so in an ordered, predictable fashion. And if any neuron does it in an unpredictable fashion, it sort of gives the other neuron a fright, and that sends out an electrical discharge in all directions. And that discharge acts again a bit like a poke to all the neighbouring neurons. And if that happens on a big enough scale, you start to get the beginnings of a seizure. The other way to think of a seizure is to think of something that we all see far too often on our computers, these signs. So you'll all be familiar with these, and when you do the force quit or the Control-Alt-Delete, that's a bit like a seizure as well. You're trying to reset the system to get everything back to working again. And although I see people that have one-offs, my main interest is people who have epilepsy. Epilepsy is a predisposition to seizures, so instead of having multiple events conspire to lower that threshold, they might only need a single event, or it might happen out of the blue. And I'd like to talk to you about two particular seizures that I find fascinating and why that is. The first is a temporal lobe seizure. Now, the temporal lobe is kind of like the inner sanctum of your brain. It's where your memories are formed, where your emotional centre lives, and where all those primitive reflexes reside. So when you smell Play-Doh and think of your childhood, that's thanks to this area in your brain. Now, when people have seizures in this area, they behave in a particular way, and it's pretty stereotyped. If you remember the scene from Matrix when Neo gets déjà vu, that's essentially a seizure. Rather than memories being laid down in a predictable fashion, I see the cat and I remember it, what happens is it appears to be laid down in an abnormal way, where it seems like I remember the cat before seeing that. And that's not to say that all déjà vu is a seizure, just that people with temporal lobe epilepsy tend to get these symptoms more often. The other thing that's really cool about temporal lobe seizures is they can make you psychic. I had one chap once who told me that he kept getting the sense that something was over his shoulder, but every time he turned to look, there was nothing there. And the reason for this was that the area of your brain that does your peripheral vision is right next to your shoulder. So he was getting a seizure in this area that was manifesting as something over his shoulder just in his peripheral vision. And I thought it was really cool, and so did he once I told him that he wouldn't need Ghostbusters to fix it. The other type of seizure, so seizure number 2, is a non-epileptic attack. And in a different way to the one we've been talking about so far, it behaves in a different way completely. And the easiest way to think of how this seizure happens is to think of blushing. When you're embarrassed, you blush. Or most people do, I have no shame. And when we're embarrassed and we blush, that's a physical manifestation of an emotional state. And non-epileptic attacks are the same thing. They're a physical expression of an emotional state, be it stress, anxiety, worry. Think of what happens when you're stressed. You might get an upset tummy, a headache, sore throat. These are the same things. A person with a non-epileptic attack has the same manifestation. You don't choose to get an upset stomach in the same way that they don't choose to have a seizure. And so this often leads them to asking me, does it all mean it's in my head? And I remind them of the scene in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, just after Harry's been Avada Kedavra, he's having the scene in King's Cross. And he turns to Dumbledore and he says, "Professor, is this all in my head?" And Dumbledore replies, "Of course it is, Harry, but that doesn't make it any less real." Thanks so much.